Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time. This is our 15th lesson. I think we have 2 more weeks to go till the end of Masechet Yevamot. I know you'll all be very sad when we finish, but this week we're going to be reviewing Daf 99 through 106. We have a lot to do. So let's get started. On Daf 99, we have various scenarios. If you remember, last week on Daf 98, we had the case of a lot of children getting mixed up. So we're going to continue with that this week. And we have this week on Daf 99, a person's mother and another woman's son get mixed up, and they have another son each, and each son marries the other mother, right? Meaning not their own mother, but the other mother, and then they die, and then each of the confused sons has to do Chalitza with the other woman, because either it's his brother's wife, but it could be also a mother, so we're not sure, right? So therefore, each one does Chalitza, right, to his mother, because he's not sure if it's really his mother, again, because of doubt, and we are concerned about the doubt that they might have. Okay, we're going to get to the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law in a minute. Okay, next, 2 women, each has a son, and then they already have one son, and then they each give birth to daughters who then get mixed up. As I mentioned, again, we're going to have a lot of people getting mixed up. And then the sons, right, the paternal brothers each marry one of these daughters, and then they die. So now again, each brother ends up doing Chalitza to his sister because of, again, a doubt, a safek. Another case, a man's wife and another woman have daughters that get mixed up, and then each husband's brother marries the other daughter. Again, it's not his own daughter, it's the other daughter, and then they die. Then each man ends up doing Chalitza to his own daughter, because again, we're not sure which one is his and which one is not. The next case, a man buys a slave and a slave woman, meaning a male and a female, and then they have 2 sons. Then one son converts. Again, you have these slave children. One of the slaves then convert. Then they go to the mikvah to become slaves, and then they have a child. But if he frees the female slave, and then the original male slave sleeps with her, that child is a mamzer, because the woman is Jewish, the man is a slave. And if he frees the male slave and then they have a son, that child is a Jew. Meaning, so this couple, meaning the male and female slave, have multiple children, and each child is a different status, right? They have 5 different children. One is a convert, one is a non-Jew, one is a slave, one is a mamzer, and one is a Jew. So the Gemara constructs a case where 2 people have 5 children, and each child is of a different category. The same thing if a man buys, again, a male and a female slave, and then they have a son, and then again, he frees this woman, and then he marries her and gives her all of his possessions. Then it turns out that, and she has now a free son. So it turns out that the son owns the father, because, again, the owner of the slave gave the freed female slave all of his possessions. Part of those possessions was her original husband. So again, complicated situations. Okay, can you see the slide with the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law? Do you see it? Okay, great. Okay, so now the next Mishnah on Daf 99. A woman's again, we're going to get people confused. Here it says intermingled sons. That means those children get mixed up. These pictures are from the Art Scroll, so thank you, Art Scroll. Okay, so a woman's child is mixed up with her daughter-in-law's child, right? So you see the mother-in-law, so she has a child, but also her daughter-in-law has a child. And those two children get mixed up. And then they get married and they have a child, and they get married and then they die. The children of the daughter-in-law do Chalitza, right? Not yibum. Again, because it could be it's his brother's wife, but it could also be his uncle's wife. And that would be a problem. And the sons of the woman, meaning of the mother-in-law, can do Chalitza or yibum. Because either it's their brother's wife, which is yibum and okay, or it's their nephew's wife, and that is also okay. The next case, let me see if I have the next case. Okay, hold on. Okay, now here it's the same case, meaning the same children got mixed up, but now it's the regular brothers get married and then they die. Right, so you see the mother-in-law's son is married and there's a widow. The daughter-in-law's son also gets married and now there's a widow. And now we have the two mixed up sons. The question is, what do? So the mixed up ones, they both do Chalitza to the mother-in-law's son's widow, because either it's the brother, right, brother-in-law's, either it's the wife of the brother, or it's the wife of the uncle, which is, again, that is okay. And then for the widow of the daughter-in-law, one does Chalitza and one can do yibum, right? Because again, the Gemara will explain why in a minute. Let me see if I have another picture. Okay, no, we'll leave this one. Hold on 1 minute. So let's go back to this one. Okay, the next case in the Mishnah is a Kohen's child gets mixed up with a slave's child. So the Mishnah tells us that they can both eat truma, because again, the Kohen and the slave both eat truma. But they only get one portion at the granary, because again, it's all under the Kohen's property. They both can't get impure, because again, we're not sure if it's the Kohen or the slave. They can't get married, because we're not sure if it's a slave or a free person. And when they grow up, they can each free each other, because one of them owns the other. And then they can marry whoever is fit for a Kohen, because either way, either he's the priest or he's a free man. And then after that, they cannot eat truma anymore, because now the slave is freed. So therefore he cannot eat truma anymore, but neither of them can get impure, and they can sell the truma and they can keep the profits, but they do not eat sacrificial meat. And basically the Mishnah ends by telling us that we have stringencies for both priesthood and for a regular Jew, because we're not sure what this person is. So the Gemara tells us again from the second case, the case that you see pictured here, that you have to do Chalitza first, and then you can do yibum. The Gemara tells us that our Mishnah is according to the opinion that you only give truma to a slave if the priest is with him, meaning if the priest is not with him, so then he does not get truma. Some cities assumed you were a priest if you went to the granary to get the truma, and therefore in those cities only a priest can go and collect the truma at the granary. The Gemara tells us that there are 10 people who don't get truma at the granary, and it goes through a list of all the people who were not acceptable, who were not allowed to get the grain, the truma at the granary. Rather, the Kohen, the priest himself, had to go and get it. Daf 100 tells us that you can actually send home truma to some of these people. Right, like the uncircumcised priest, it's not his fault that he can't be circumcised, so you can send home the truma to him. The Gemara says that if the woman, the wife, comes to the granary to collect the truma, so she needs to get the truma first, right? It's not proper for her to stand and wait with all the men. So the Gemara tells us that she gets the truma first, and then she leaves quickly. The Gemara tells us that Rava used to hear the men's cases before the women's cases when they came to court, because he felt that, men are obligated to fulfill more commandments, so therefore he should hear their, maybe they're more important, or they need to go first. But then he heard this braita that we just read about it not being proper for the women to hang around, and then the Gemara says that he changed his mind and he would hear the women's cases first, so as to not be disgraceful to the women. We're going to see this a few times actually in this week's class, the judges being sensitive to the women. So this is the first time. We'll see a few more cases in a minute. The Gemara continues on 100 that the Kohen and the slave, if they get mixed up, we actually force them to free each other so that they can get married. If they don't free each other, neither of them can get married, because, again, if it's a slave, he can only marry a slave. If it's a Kohen, he can only marry certain people. Therefore, we make sure that they free each other. Okay, the next Mishnah has a case, again, since we're talking about people getting mixed up. If you remember earlier in the Masechet, we discussed that if a woman gets divorced or is going to do yibum or moves from one man to another, she needs to wait 3 months. The reason she needed to wait 3 months was we wanted to make sure to see if she was pregnant or not. So here we have a Mishnah where a woman doesn't wait those 3 months before remarrying, and now she has a son and she doesn't know who the father is, right? Either it's a full-term baby from the original husband, or maybe it was a 7th month, right? It's an early child from the second husband. Now, again, this is going to get complicated because we need to know who the father is, because we need to know who the brothers are for yibum, right? So the brothers from both marriages have to do chalitza because we're not sure who are the brothers. Nobody can do yibum because, again, as we mentioned, we don't know who's the real brother. And so too the opposite, right? He can only do chalitza for them. He cannot do yibum. Again, we don't know if they're maternal or paternal brothers. The Mishnah continues, if each father has a son from another woman, then he can either do chalitza or yibum, because again, either they're brothers or they're not related at all, and therefore they can do yibum. If this child dies, the one that's in question, then one of the other brothers does chalitza, and then the other one can do yibum. Again, as we mentioned before, we have to do chalitza first because maybe he's the real brother, and then the other one can do yibum. Either he's the brother or he's not related. What if the fathers were different, right, from different tribes? Right? If one man was a Yisrael and the other one was a priest, So then this child can only marry a woman that's fit for a priest because maybe he's a priest, but he cannot eat truma because maybe he's not a priest. As we mentioned before, in all of these cases, we're going to have the stringencies of being a priest and of being Yisrael. However, if they're both priests, right, let's say her first and her second husband were both priests, then he, he is seen as a Kohen. He mourns both of the fathers, right, because again, we don't know who the father is. He doesn't inherit them because we don't know which one is the father, but they do inherit him, which gets complicated. And again, if they're both priests, so then he goes to the temple for each one of their, remember, their mishmarot, right? The weeks when that Kohen's family is on duty. So he's going to go to both of the, both mishmarot, because maybe he's from one family, but maybe he's from the other. However, he cannot eat the sacrificial meat because we're not sure if he's supposed to be on duty at that time or not. But if they happen to be in the same mishmar, right there, if they're from the same family, so then he goes to work on that week, and then he can eat the sacrificial meat. The Gemara says, again, as I mentioned, we're always going to do Chalitza before yibum to make sure if he's the brother that Chalitza was done. Now, if one man out of, so there were, let's say there were 10 priests. If one of these priests got a woman pregnant, so now the child is called a shtuki. Shtuki from the word lishtok, like to be quiet, right? It means that the mother doesn't really know who the father is, right? He goes out, the child goes to the street and he says, Abba, Abba, and the mother's like, shh, shh, we don't know who the father is. So he's called a shtuki, right? She silences him because he doesn't know who his father is. And again, that's called a shtuki. And then again, we say that this person, is a Kohen, but again, doesn't know who his father is, which is problematic. And then the Gemara says, actually, he really could be a Kohen. He could even be a high priest. Because we know he's a priest, we just don't know who the father is. So that's the machloket. Okay, Daf 101 tells us, again, back to he doesn't know who his father is. If he curses or he hits one of those fathers, right, so if he hits both of them, then he's liable because we know one of them is at least, one of them is his father. But we say, no, that's not the case. He doesn't get punished for hitting the father because we can never warn him, right? With anything that we need to get, if there's a commandment that you're not allowed to do something, in order to get punished, you need to be told, don't do that, right? Don't hit your father. But I don't know if that's your father. So one opinion is he could never be punished because we don't really know who his father is. Okay, and with that, we finish the 11th chapter of Yevamot. We are going to start and finish the 12th chapter. And finally, as I always say, when we get to the end of a chapter, when we get to the end of a masechet, we're actually getting to the fundamental concepts. This chapter is all about Chalitza. What is the ceremony? How is it done? What are all the details? And I'm going to share with you, someone actually posted on Facebook, Adina Sternberg is her name. She posted that her father actually did a Chalitza ceremony with her aunt 15 years ago. So I'm going to share those pictures with you at the end. First, we're going to learn what the ceremony is all about, and then I'm going to show you the pictures. Okay, so let's do the Mishnah on, so I guess I can, hold on, I guess I can stop sharing for a minute, and then I'll share again. I'll share again when we get to the pictures. Okay. So the Mishnah tells us on 101, Chalitza needs to be done in front of 3 judges or 3 people, 3 regular people. They have to use a special sandal. Sandal is the word that's used in Hebrew, or min'al. Min'al, right? Sandal is in sandal, or min'al, which is a shoe. And we're going to discuss the differences between the 2 of these. The Gemara actually tells us in a minute that sandal isn't really a sandal, rather sandal was a shoe made out of hard leather, and min'al was a shoe made out of soft leather. And either one can be used. The Gemara is going to discuss which one is better. It needs to be worn on the foot, meaning from the knee and down. We'll see what that means in a minute. And if the Yavam's foot was amputated below the knee, meaning there's nothing below, if he doesn't have anything below his knee, you actually cannot do yibum, right? He needs to have a leg in order to do chalitza. The Mishnah tells us that you can use a shoe that doesn't belong to the Yavam, and I'll show you the pictures in a minute. There's actually a special shoe. Actually, if you saw the slide, so Web Yeshiva made the slide shows the picture of the special shoe, which we'll see in a minute. And the shoe can be, it should be made of leather, but it could also be made out of wood. You could use a left shoe on a right foot. It doesn't have to be the exact shoe for the right foot. It could actually be too big or too small. We'll see how big and how small. Okay, let's get to the Gemara. The Gemara tells us 3 people who can dictate the passages that need to be recited. As long as they can dictate those passages, then they are valid as the Beit Din, the court. They don't have to be extremely knowledgeable in other things. Rabbi Yehuda says it needs to be 5 people, and this is all going to be based on the verses and how they read the verses. The Gemara says that they can't be blind people. The court needs to be able to see, and therefore they need to be clean in the sense of being. They need to have integrity, and they also need to not have any physical blemishes. Again, as a court, they need to uphold a certain standard. They are going to, they're going to use the same verse to teach that, again, they have to be able to see. We said that they have to be able to have sight, but others use that verse to say that they need to be able to see the spit. We're going to see in a minute that the Yevamot is going to spit in front of the Yavam, so they need to be able to see that. Also, the Gemara tells us that everyone present needs to make the declaration that we're going to see in a minute. From here, it says, V'dibru elav, they speak to him. And we actually saw this previously, but here the Gemara tells us that the court is going to speak appropriately to each Yavam, meaning they're going to give advice based on who the couple is, right? There's no golden rule. It doesn't mean, right, we discussed what's better, yibum or chalitza. And here the Gemara tells us that it's going to be based on the people who are standing before the court, right? And the Gemara says that if they're not appropriate for each other, then the court will suggest that they do chalitza instead of yibum. So too with miyun. Miyun, if you remember, was when a young girl is married off by her brother, right? If she's married off by her father, that's a biblical marriage. If she's married off by her brother, meaning she's an orphan, that marriage is rabbinic, and she has the right till she's the age of 12 to annul the marriage. She says, I don't want to be married. We're going to learn more about miyun in this chapter. If she says, I don't want to be married, that marriage is annulled. That also needs 3 people, or maybe 2 people are enough. And again, we're going to learn about miyun later on. We need to designate a place for the Chalitza ceremony beforehand. Again, this is based on a verse. And here there are stories of them doing Chalitza in front of 5 men, or maybe you only need 3, but the rest are to publicize the event. Daf 102 tells us that a convert can be a judge for another convert in a capital case, but a convert can only judge a Yisrael on monetary cases, but not capital cases. Here for Chalitza, the judges need to be a Yisrael, meaning a Jew from birth, and cannot be a convert. Again, this is based on a verse, not for any judgment. So here, on 102, the Gemara tells us that the custom was to use a min'al or sandal, and here there's a machloket, which one is preferred, but it seems that they are both valid. The preferred method of Chalitza is that the Yevamot unties. You're going to see, I'll show you in a minute, but the shoe it's like a leather shoe that has straps. So she's going to untie the straps and then remove the shoe. And when she removes most of the heel from the shoe, most of the heel of the foot, that's a valid Chalitza, even if she doesn't completely remove the shoe. And she has to do both actions. If he does one of them, it's invalid. She needs to do the whole action of removing the shoe. And here, very interestingly, there's a whole discussion about intent. The Gemara tells us that they both need intent. If one doesn't have intent that they're doing Chalitza, then it is invalid. Or some say, if you're not sure if she had intent, so she can't marry anybody else, but she's prohibited from marrying the brothers, meaning it's seen as a quasi Chalitza. As we said, the shoe should be made out of leather. The straps can be made out of animal hair, or something that grows out of the hide. As we mentioned, Chalitza means removal, right? Lachlotz means to remove. And the Gemara brings different verses to prove the word Chalitza. And here there's a story about a heretic who tells Rabban Gamliel, God used to love the Jews, but he did Chalitza now with the Jews, right? We see from the Gemara that these heretics really understood Jewish law, or at least the concepts, enough to argue, right? So he says, God used to be married to the Jewish people, but he did Chalitza, right? He doesn't love you anymore. And the Rabban Gamliel says, right, he says, chalatz mihem, right, there's a verse that says chalatz mihem, right, meaning we tried to do chalitza from God, but that doesn't work, right? Our bond with God is eternal, right? So it's actually a beautiful concept that, right, we might try to push God away, but God doesn't accept it, right? God is bound to us, or we are bound to God forever, which is, I think, a beautiful idea. The Gemara continues that a sock is invalid. Again, it's not a shoe, it needs to be a sock. What if she uses a torn shoe, but if it covered most of the foot, then it is valid. And if it was a hard material, not leather, or made out of wood, or a leather sock, so these are actually all valid. If the Yavam was blind, it is valid. Remember, we said the judges need to be seeing. The Yavam does not. And if the Yavam sat, stood, or leaned, so that's okay, meaning he doesn't have to be standing or sitting. It doesn't matter what position he's in. But the Gemara tells us on Daf 103 that the Yavam has to press his foot to the ground so that, right, he's not helping her in any way, right? Like, I guess it's our natural, kind of inclination to take our foot out of the shoe. So instead he has to press it down on the floor so that she has to actually pull it off of his foot. So if the Yavam has a deformed foot, so then you can't do yibum, because again, it needs to be a foot. But if there's an ankle, right? If there's most of the foot, so then it might be okay. Here, since we're talking about the word regel, there's a machloket if the regel means foot or leg or thigh. And since we're talking about regel, so the Gemara goes on a tangent of every time a verse says ben ragleha, between her legs, that's usually a euphemism for having sexual relations. It's seen with Yael and Sisra. If you remember, Sisra is the general, Yael is the one who kills Sisra with a tent peg. That is in the book of Judges in Shoftim. During the time of Dvorah, they're in war with Sisra as the general. So it seems that first they have relations, and then he passes out, and then she kills him. Okay, back to Chalitza. We said that it could be anybody's shoe. It doesn't have to be his own shoe, but he has to be able to walk in it. It has to cover most of his foot. As we said, it could be too small or it could be too big, but he has to be able to walk in it. Okay, from here we get into a discussion about tzara'at, about leprosy. Again, biblical leprosy, not the leprosy of nowadays. So there's tzarat of clothing. You can get biblical leprosy on your clothing. You can also get it in your house. And here the Gemara is talking about what if you had a shoe and you weren't sure if it had tzarat, right? So there's some sort of sign on it, and the priest comes and checks, and he's not sure. That's called confined, musgar. You put the shoe away for a week. The priest comes back after a week. He checks it, and then he confirms if it has tzarat or not. So here the Gemara tells us that you cannot use a shoe that was confined, right, that was put away for the week for Chalitza. But if they did do it, so then it's valid. If it's confirmed that it had a tzarat, then it's invalid, even retroactively. You're not allowed to use a shoe that has tzarat for Chalitza. Though some say that retroactively, b'di'eved, you can use it. And now we're going to get to like a house, right? So a confined house, if we're not sure if it has tzarat or not, it does transmit tuma, impurity, if you're inside it. The confirmed house also transmits impurity on the outside of the walls, not only on the inside, but even if you touch the outside. And a cloth that's 3 by 3 fingers, that's the minimum size that a cloth can become impure. If it's brought into this house, it would become impure. Okay, so the law is that retroactively, b'di'eved, it is valid to do chalitza with even the confirmed shoe, even if you're not sure if it has tzarat, or even if you are sure, retroactively it is a valid chalitza. Okay, 104. A shoe used for idol worship or for burial is invalid for chalitza. Again, he needs to own the shoe. You're not allowed to own anything that was used for idol worship, and therefore you cannot use this shoe for chalitza. The next Mishnah tells us that there's a machloket if she can do chalitza at night. Again, we're going to see, is it seen as judgment? Judgment is only done during the day, not at night. Or what if it's on his left shoe, on his left foot? Is that okay or not? And that's the machloket. The Gemara tells us that again, it's a question if chalitza is like tzarat, that it has to be done during the day, or we say, no, it's not comparable to tzarat. Maybe it's like the beginning of a trial that you can only start it during the day, or maybe it's like the end of a trial that could be done even at night. And here we have a story about Rebbe Bar Chia, who presided over a chalitza with a felt shoe, meaning not leather, and it was at night, and he was by himself, and they say, right, that's not okay, and then they explain how in the end it was okay, because he knew what he was doing. Again, we said, it says the word regel, foot. We say that for the leper, the mitzorah, everything, when it says the word regel, it means right foot, and therefore maybe for chalitza as well, it must be done on the right foot, or maybe not. Okay, and then, okay, so now the next Mishnah, it's important to understand that there are 3 parts to chalitza, right? On page 104, we've learned 104 pages and or 103 pages. Now we're going to see exactly what chalitza is. So there are 3 parts. 1 is removing the shoe, 2 is reciting the verses, and 3 is spitting in front of the person. Again, they don't spit into his face, they spit onto the floor. So we have 3 parts. This Mishnah is going to discuss what if you don't do all the parts, right? Because of course we need to get a little complicated. Okay, if she removed the shoe and she spit, so that's valid, even if she didn't read the verses. If she read the verses and spit, but she didn't take off the shoe, invalid. If she didn't spit, so that's a machloket, meaning she only took off the shoe and said the verses. It's a machloket if it's valid. Basically, the verse says, kacha ya'aseh. This is how it has to be done, right? So it has to be done exactly, or maybe the spitting isn't essential, right? And that's what we're going to try to figure out. If either one of them is a deaf mute, meaning they cannot speak, or if the yavam is a minor, it is invalid, right? You cannot do chalitza. If the yevamot is a minor, she can do it, but she has to do it again when she becomes an adult in order for it to be valid. If there were only 2 people witnessing it, or if there were 3, but one of them was related to them, so that's invalid. Some people say it's okay, meaning at least 2 people, some say that it's okay. And there's a story at the end of the Mishnah that once there was this couple, there was a couple who were in prison, meaning they were alone, and they did chalitza, and Rabbi Akiva said that that was okay, which is interesting because we just said it has to be done in front of judges and everyone has to see it, but they did it in front of they did it in prison by themselves. Rabbi Akiva said it's okay, and the Gemara is going to discuss what this means. Okay, the Gemara tells us that it seems like the reciting of the verses isn't obligatory, therefore they can be mute, and the chalitza is valid. So again, the Gemara says, or no, you have to be able to say the verses. Just because the Gemara basically says you have to be able to say them, but if you don't say them, that's okay. But if you can't say them, that's problematic, right? You have to be able to verbalize them, but if you didn't say them, then it's okay. It doesn't invalidate the whole process. If the Yevamot spits at the Gemara tells us that if the Yevamot walks by one of the brothers and she spits at him, right? So now she has to do Chalitza to that brother, right? Because we don't know why she spit at him. Maybe she was doing it in order to show that she wanted to do Chalitza, and therefore she can't marry any of the other brothers, and she has to do Chalitza. Daf 105 tells us again, here are the different stages, right? If she just did Chalitza and she didn't do the other two parts, that's valid, meaning she only took off the shoe, that would be valid. If she only spit, that's invalid. And if she only said the verses, that's also invalid. The Gemara seems to say that if she spits at them, so then she can't marry any of the other brothers. She can't marry anybody else, but she also can't marry the brothers, meaning it's invalid, but it does do something. Okay. Okay, so we said that the spitting comes at the end, but again, it doesn't have to be, if she spits at the beginning, that also counts. Right, again, as I said, the order is not essential. If a woman doesn't have, what if a woman doesn't have hands? Right, we talked about the man not having a foot. What if she doesn't have hands? She can still do Chalitza. So she figures out a way to take off the shoe. She can still do Chalitza. Okay. There's a machluket if Chalitza of a minor is valid, as I mentioned before. Again, because it says the word ish. So again, does the man have to be an ish, an adult? There's also a machluket if she can be a minor, right? We're not sure. There's a machluket if you should. So from here, the Gemara talks about prayer, and it says that the question is, should you look down when you pray, right, as a sense of humility, or do you look up when you pray, right, as a sense of being hopeful? So the Gemara actually says we do both. What does that mean? You should look down, but you should direct your heart up. And this is this idea of right, being humble, but also being hopeful. There's a story of Rebbe who came into the study hall, and then everybody took their seats except for Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, who was seems to have been a very large man, and he was walking very slowly. And there seems to be this whole story about humility and arrogance, right? Because it seems that, everybody took their seat very quickly and he didn't. He was walking very slowly, and that was perceived as being arrogant. And then this whole conversation goes back and forth, right? They say to him, who do you think you are, that you're so arrogant in front of Rebbe, in front of the wise teacher? And he says, like they say to him, you think you're so worthy? And he says, do you think Moshe was worthy to learn in front of God? Meaning, you don't have to be worthy to learn, right? We are all students are humble in front of their teachers, right? So he says, do you think Moshe was worthy to learn from God? And they say, you think you're like Moshe? And he says, you think you're like God, right? There's this whole strange conversation back and forth. I think there's a lot of miscommunication here. There's a lot of judgment, which, as we know, is not good. And it seems that everybody is put in place for this whole conversation. They get punished for judging each other. I think it's a very powerful story. I think the lesson is, don't judge other people, and everybody should just be humble by themselves. Moving back to Chalitza, a girl over the age of 6 or 7 seems to be able to do Chalitza, or maybe they have to be 11, or maybe she has to be 12. Again, as we said, does she have to be an adult or not? The story of the prison, as we mentioned, there were no witnesses present, but it seems that there were witnesses who saw it from the outside, and that's why Rabbi Akiva said that it was okay. Daf 106 discusses the concept of a mistaken chalitza. What does that mean? The Gemara gives us a number of stories of basically where the court tricks the man into doing chalitza. And the Gemara tells us that this is okay. Or maybe it means that they're allowed to bribe him to do chalitza, meaning they have proper intent, just it's ulterior motives, meaning really you should do it because you want to do it, but if they need to bribe him, it's okay. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to see cases where I think it's really important to recognize that the court was really trying to help the women of the time. I know that learning this Masechet has maybe been a little challenging for some women. We've encountered some challenging stories, but I think it is really interesting that that here the court is really on the woman's side, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. Yes, Lynn reminds me also that Rabbi Akiva ruled about that case about the people in prison when he himself was also in prison. Exactly. There was a parallel in that story as well. Okay, let's see the cases. So there's a case of a girl who didn't want to do yibum because she said that the yavam just wanted to marry her because of the money. And when they explained it to Rabbi Chia, he told her, you're right, you should do chalitza, don't do yibum. And they basically tricked the yavam into doing chalitza, and that was seen as valid, right? Abaye offered money for someone to do chalitza. It seems at the end of that story, she says, oh, just joking, I didn't really want to pay you. And it seems that that's okay, but that's another story. And from here, the Gemara talks about, what about a mistaken get? Can you trick someone or give them incentive to give a divorce, a get? The Gemara says no. That is invalid. As we mentioned, a forced chalitza is invalid. However, a forced get is valid. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, a forced get is valid? How is that possible? So the Gemara says, no. If he says, I'm right, like if you maybe kind of coerce him, but at the end he says, I'm willing to give the get, that is considered valid. But it has to be out of his ratzon. He needs to be willing to give the get and to do chalitza. The judges need to recognize the yavam and the yivama. They have to know who they're talking to, but the witnesses who are there, the judges don't need to recognize, they don't need to know who they are, but the witnesses do. And they're the ones who are going to sign the documents. The same with mi'un. As I mentioned, mi'un, we're going to talk about that actually next week, about mi'un. Or the Gemara says, no, the opposite. It's the judges that need to recognize the people, and the witnesses don't, meaning they're not actually signing a document. Okay, last Mishnah for today. the Yavam and the Yevamah, they need to come to court, and they advise them, as I mentioned, what's best for them to do. They declare, let's say they declare they don't want to do yibum. They need to say all those verses in Hebrew. She then takes off his shoe, she spits in front of him, and then she says, right, kacha ya'aseh la'ish, right, she says the verses, and it was customary to read the whole chapter of the verses, and then they call after him, right, Beit Chalutz Hana'al, right, this is the person whose shoe was removed. Either it's the judges who say it, or the people there say it. The Gemara says basically that she recites the verses and then he recites them, then she removes the shoe, she spits, and then she recites the last verses. This is the order, and as I mentioned, though, they don't have to do everything in order, right? I mean, there is an order, but if they don't do it, that is also okay. They have to recite the words carefully, right? Because he has to say, right, I don't want to do yibum, right? As opposed to, right, I do not want to do, right? We have to be very careful how he says the words, so it sounds exactly like he means it, that he doesn't want to do yibum. Some people wrote some of the verses on the Chalitza document. Some of them wrote the full verses, that it seems to be different customs. As we mentioned, that she has to spit, that spit has to, right, we said she spits in front of him. So the Gemara tells us it has to at least get to the height of his face, like it's as if she's spitting in his face. She doesn't have to, but let's say she spits and then a wind comes and blows it away and it never hits the floor. That's okay, as long as it gets to in front of his face, then that is okay. And as I mentioned before, the judges have to see it leaving her mouth. And as we mentioned, the people say Chalutz Hana'al, they say it 3 times. And with that, we have learned about the Chalitza process. And I just want to share, hold on 1 minute. I'm going to share, 1 second. Oh, no. Wait, no, that wasn't good. Hold on, sorry. I'm going to share, wait, stop. Oh, I guess I can do it this way. Hold on. 1 minute. Okay, can you see the screen? Wait.
Yes.
Can you see? Yeah? Okay, hold on here. Okay, so this is a Halita ceremony that was done 15 years ago. Let me see if I can. Oh, here. Okay, can you see the shoe? You can see the shoe here and the straps.
Yes.
And here are the judges sitting here and they're watching. They're watching her. You're going to see here she's removing the shoe. Here, let's zoom in. She's removing it. That's the Chalitza. You see, she took off the laces and she's taking off the shoe. And I think here you see this, it's a special sandal or shoe with straps here. So that was shared by Adina Sternberg on Facebook. So I thought I would share that with you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Wishing everyone a wonderful week. Next week, I will be home and with my regular computer. So Bezrat Hashem, it will be better, but I think this worked out well, thank God. Wishing everyone a wonderful week.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.